What if I told you that in 2025, Burkina Faso is making history by taking back control of its land from foreign powers, following the footsteps of South Africa? This bold move is shaking the foundations of Western influence in Africa. For decades, African nations have struggled with land ownership laws that favor foreign corporations, leaving local communities landless. But now, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso is rewriting the rules, prioritizing sovereignty over Western interests. Could this be the start of a continental revolution? Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking details of Burkina Faso's land reforms and their impact on Africa's future. Before we continue, take a moment to support our channel. Subscribe to the African Web and hit the bell icon to stay updated on Africa's journey towards independence and prosperity. The battle for land ownership in Africa is as old as colonialism itself. Since the era of European conquest, vast tracts of African land have been controlled by foreign settlers and multinational corporations. These entities have profited immensely, exploiting Africa's fertile lands for commercial farming, mining, and resource extraction, while leaving indigenous populations impoverished and dependent. South Africa has been at the forefront of land reform efforts. In 2024, it officially enacted the Land Expropriation Act, allowing the government to seize land without compensation for public use. This landmark decision faced strong opposition from Western nations, particularly the United States, which claimed it violated property rights. Yet South Africa remained resolute, understanding that true economic freedom could not be achieved without reclaiming its land. Now Burkina Faso is following suit. The country is set to pass a revolutionary land reform bill that will transfer ownership of all land to the state. This means that foreign corporations will no longer be able to own land outright. Instead, land will be allocated based on national interests, ensuring that Burkina Faso's resources benefit its people first. To understand the significance of these reforms, we must first revisit the historical struggles African nations have faced regarding land ownership. During colonial rule, European powers systematically seized African lands, displacing indigenous communities and establishing exploitative agricultural and mining industries. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, which divided Africa among European nations without African representation, set the stage for over a century of foreign land dominance. In many African nations, colonial land laws persisted even after independence. Countries such as Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Namibia saw foreign settlers continue to control vast tracts of fertile land, while local populations were pushed into less productive areas. Efforts to reclaim these lands have often been met with resistance from Western nations, which impose economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure to maintain their grip on Africa's resources. The case of Zimbabwe is a prime example. In the early 2000s, President Robert Mugabe launched an ambitious land reform program, redistributing land from white settlers to black Zimbabweans. While the move was meant to rectify historical injustices, it faced harsh backlash from Western powers. Economic sanctions were imposed, crippling Zimbabwe's economy. However, the country persisted, demonstrating Africa's resilience against neocolonial pressure. The significance of land reform extends beyond Burkina Faso. Across the continent, nations are realizing that economic independence is impossible without land sovereignty. Foreign entities continue to dominate Africa's agricultural and mining sectors, often prioritizing exports over local food security. As a result, African nations remain heavily reliant on imports despite possessing vast natural resources. Burkina Faso's bold move represents a broader trend, Africa reclaiming its destiny. By nationalizing land, the government can ensure that agricultural production serves local populations before export markets. Food security remains a major issue across Africa, with many nations depending on imports despite having fertile land. Boost industrialization by allocating land for infrastructure and economic development. With control over land, governments can prioritize projects that benefit the local economy rather than foreign investors. Reduce land disputes, a major source of conflict between farmers, herders, and indigenous communities. Many African countries have suffered from violent clashes over land due to unclear ownership laws. Protect Africa's wealth from foreign exploitation. By ensuring that land remains in African hands, wealth generated from natural resources can directly benefit local populations. Countries like Mali and Zimbabwe have attempted similar policies with mixed results. Zimbabwe's 2000 land reforms, which redistributed farmland from white settlers to black Zimbabweans, were met with harsh Western sanctions. The goal was to cripple Zimbabwe's economy as a warning to other African nations. However, Zimbabwe persisted, and while challenges remain, the country proved that Africa could defy Western pressure and reclaim its resources. Unsurprisingly, Western leaders, including US President Donald Trump, have reacted strongly to these developments. The fear is clear. If African nations take full control of their land, Western corporations will lose billions in profits. Figures like Elon Musk, whose business interests extend across Africa, have called for sanctions against nations implementing land reforms. Western media outlets have also launched campaigns painting these reforms as reckless and dangerous. But the reality is different. These reforms are not about revenge or destabilization. They are about justice. For centuries, Africa's wealth has been siphoned off to benefit foreign powers while local communities suffered. Now, African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are taking a stand, ensuring that Africa's resources serve its people first. The response from the West reveals a deep-rooted fear of Africa's economic emancipation. If more nations follow Burkina Faso's lead, the Western monopoly on African resources will collapse. This is why Western governments and corporations are mobilizing against these reforms, using economic sanctions, political pressure, and media propaganda to maintain control. The question remains, will other African nations follow Burkina Faso's lead? Will this be the catalyst for a continent-wide shift towards land sovereignty? As Western powers scramble to protect their interests, Africa stands at a crossroads. The decisions made today will determine the continent's future for generations to come. Several African nations are closely watching Burkina Faso's progress. Countries like Ghana, Tanzania, and Nigeria have long debated the necessity of land reforms, but have hesitated due to fears of Western backlash. However, if Burkina Faso successfully implements its policies and demonstrates tangible benefits, it could inspire a wave of similar reforms across the continent. Additionally, the African Union, AU, has a crucial role to play. If the AU supports these reforms and provides a united front against external pressure, African nations will be better positioned to reclaim their land and resources. Pan-African organizations and grassroots movements are already rallying behind Burkina Faso, signaling growing support for land sovereignty. What do you think? Should more African nations adopt Burkina Faso's approach to land reform? Is this the beginning of a new era of African independence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this discussion insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the African Web for more content on Africa's fight for economic freedom and sovereignty.